Hi guys, in this episode we're going to talk about shorthand notation for the 7th chord formulas, creating a 7th chord on any root. We're going to cover all the 7th chords, enharmonic 7th chords, tertian and non-tertian 7th chords, quick 7th chord creation tips, and other 7th chords and their formulas. Let's get started. The shorthand notation for the 7th chord formulas are shown here. Correct construction and notation of 7th chords is assured through the use of the aforementioned 7th chord formulas, triads, major scales, and interval formulas as reference tools. To demonstrate this, let's construct a G fully diminished 7th chord. We begin by looking at the fully diminished 7th chord formula. The formula states that a diminished triad is necessary. We begin with a G diminished triad which provides the first three notes of the G diminished 7th chord: G, B flat, and D flat. Let's add the diminished 7th next. Since the root of the fully diminished 7th chord is G, let's begin by looking at the G major scale. Notice that F sharp is found to be the 7th degree of the G major scale. Looking at the first part of the interval formula, we see this listed for sevenths. Since F sharp is in the G major scale, it is a major 7th according to the interval formula. We need a diminished 7th, however. To achieve our desired diminished 7th, we must shorten the distance between the root and the 7th by 2 half steps. We can accomplish this by removing the sharp from F sharp, the 7th scale degree, making it F, a minor 7th. This shortens the distance by a half step only, so we must remove another half step by adding a flat to F, making it a diminished 7th. We can now construct our G fully diminished 7th chord by adding this diminished 7th to the G diminished triad. Incidentally, fully diminished 7th chords are also simply referred to as diminished 7th chords. Let's construct one more 7th chord to demonstrate this process again. In this example, we will create a B augmented 7th chord. We'll begin by looking at the augmented 7th chord formula. This formula states that an augmented triad is required. We begin with a B augmented triad which provides the first three notes of the B augmented 7th chord: B, D sharp, and F double sharp. We need to add the minor 7th next. Since the root of the augmented 7th chord is B, let's start by looking at the B major scale. Notice that A sharp is found to be the 7th degree of the B major scale. Looking at the first part of the interval formula, we see this listed for sevenths. Since A sharp is in the B major scale, it is a major 7th according to the interval formula. We need a minor 7th, however. To achieve our desired minor 7th, we must shorten the distance between the root and the 7th by a half step. We can accomplish this by removing the sharp from A sharp, the 7th scale degree, making it A. We can now construct our B augmented 7th chord by adding this minor 7th to the B augmented triad. Here are all the major, dominant, minor, half diminished, fully diminished, augmented, and minor major 7th chords. The correct right-hand fingerings are listed to the left of each chord. Notice that some of the chords, such as D flat major 7th and C sharp major 7th, are enharmonic 7th chords. Thoroughly memorize all these 7th chords before moving on. We'll begin with the major 7th chords. Here's how they sound. Here's the dominant 7th chords. These are the minor 7th chords. The following are the half diminished 7th chords. These are the fully diminished 7th chords. These are the augmented 7th chords. And finally, here's the minor major 7th chords. Incidentally, when writing triads or 7th chords in their most basic presentation, that is, in the order from the bottom consisting of the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th, the chord factors are presented on either adjacent lines or adjacent spaces, as shown here. This is an easy way to assure you are writing your chords correctly as opposed to an enharmonic spelling that will be theoretically incorrect and visually confusing for the sight reader. When chord factors are presented on adjacent lines or adjacent spaces, they result in stacked thirds. Chords created in this way are examples of tertian chords, or chords created from stacked thirds. To be completely accurate, in a strict sense, chords consisting of stacked thirds must contain only major or minor thirds to be considered tertian. Chords such as the augmented 7th chord, which consists of a major third, and diminished third, are referred to as non-tertian chords since it also contains a diminished third. Triads are stacked thirds, 7th chords are stacked thirds, and thirds can continue to be stacked on top of 7th chords, resulting in 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths, as we shall see in an upcoming episode. Most harmony in Western music is tertian in nature. To facilitate quicker learning of all 7th chords, you can begin by memorizing all the major 7th chords. This can be more easily accomplished by playing the major triad contained in the major 7th chord, adding the octave to the root of the chord to the triad, and then lowering the octave by a half step to add the 7th to the triad, being careful not to make enharmonic notation mistakes when notating. Take the time now to do this on every note. Do not continue until you have thoroughly memorized all of the major 7th chords. Next, notice the order in which I have presented the 7th chords. This order was intentional. With the exception of the augmented and minor major 7th chord, notice you can change a chord to the chord directly below it by changing only one note. For example, to get a dominant 7th from a major 7th, start with the major 7th and lower the 7th by a half step. To get a minor 7th from a dominant 7th, start with the dominant 7th and lower the 3rd by a half step. To get a half diminished 7th from a minor 7th, start with the minor 7th and lower the 5th by a half step. To get a fully diminished 7th from a half diminished 7th, start with the half diminished 7th and lower the 7th by a half step. This leaves the augmented 7th and minor major 7th chord. The augmented 7th can be created by going back to the dominant 7th chord and raising the 5th by a half step. The minor major 7th chord can be created by going back to the major 7th chord and lowering the 3rd by a half step. Again, notice the order in which the 7th chords are presented. If you can remember this order as well as which specific notes change when descending down the list, you will soon be able to play them all at will. These are the most common 7th chords, but are by no means all the 7th chords in existence. Other 7th chords we'll be exploring later are listed here. The augmented major 7th chord consists of an augmented triad and a major 7th above the root. Here's how this sounds. The major 7th flat 5 chord consists of a major triad with a diminished 5th as well as a major 7th above the root. Here's how this sounds. The dominant 7th flat 5 consists of a major triad with a diminished 5th as well as a minor 7th above the root. Here's how this sounds. The minor 7th sharp 5 chord consists of a minor triad with an augmented 5th as well as a minor 7th above the root. Here's how this sounds. The diminished major 7th chord consists of a diminished triad as well as a major 7th above the root. Here's how this sounds. And finally, the minor major 7th sharp 5 chord consists of a minor triad with an augmented 5th as well as a major 7th above the root. Here's how this sounds. And here are the formulas to construct these other 7th chords. Note that with the exception of the augmented major 7th, All of these chords are considered non-tertian since they have thirds other than just major or minor thirds. This is not an exhaustive list of 7th chords by any means, as there are various combinations of major, minor, augmented, and diminished thirds, fifths, and sevenths. These are just the additional 7th chords you may see in certain musical styles such as fusion and orchestral music. Hey, thanks for watching the video. Be sure to like and leave a comment below if you have any questions. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. If you like the music you've been listening to, please be sure to check out my friend Bryn Stanley's album, Classic Christmas, at this link.
Had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows.